from out of California. So first I want to give them a hand for coming on out. Appreciate you guys. I'd like to thank our sponsors, right? So we have Unity and Cato are sponsoring the event. To learn more about them, we'll be hosting a subsequent webinar on their value proposition here in about 2 to 3 weeks, right? Very interesting organizations, so we'll get to know them, but you can always engage them directly. As part of the integrity of the group is that we don't try to sell you a sir. We're not going to come out here and give you a pitch. We want to talk about educational content that's germane to their businesses and hopefully help you navigate your business with their feedback. So, again, thank you, Cato and Unity. I appreciate everybody coming out here. And so, with that being said, you guys want to take a seat? Sure. And did you get your mic yet? I don't know if we need it, but I hope not. Yeah. Right. Well, the last time I was here, I started yelling. I don't want to yell. But, so if we could kind of go from right to left, sort of Michael, let's talk about AI journeys and what you're seeing from a lot of organizations, right? So you have a unique perspective because you're touching a lot of different companies across a lot of different industries. So what kind of AI projects are you seeing out there? What tools? And first, please tell us a little bit about Cato Networks and your role.
Yeah, so a little bit about Cato and my role. My role is still CTO, so a lot of it is doing these types of engagements. So speaking in groups, speaking at conferences, all of that, and also basically anything else that is done. So almost the digital janitor at Cato Networks. As far as projects we're seeing customers embark on, almost every customer I talk to is doing something with AI, and they're trying to figure out how to put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's already made it into the business. People are using it in the business, and everybody is trying to figure out how they can stop it, basically. So there are a variety of tools and technologies out there. We're not going to discuss this here, but the biggest thing I'm seeing is around how do you put the toothpaste back in the tube, or how do you put the genie back in the bottle, and how do you control it and get your arms around this massive thing that is AI. And it's even worse than shadow IT, because usually shadow IT requires somebody to buy something or give a credit card to AWS, maybe for $1 an hour for a server somewhere to run an AWS. But with AI, there are so many free tools out there that anybody can just start using it. Anybody can start feeding sensitive corporate data in there, and it's just an absolute nightmare trying to get their arms back around it and again put that genie back in the bottle. So that's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing customers do today.
Okay. So a lot in your position is something unique because you're the chief product officer. Company, but doing a lot of development on new products and services. And I think you say you're partnering with MIT on some things, right? So, yeah, tell us about your AI journey and what you guys are doing today.
Okay, thank you. Wow, this is the mic. All right. Well, hello everybody. Nice to meet you. Thank you for hosting us, bringing such a great group together. I work for a company called First Rate. It's headquartered out of Arlington, Texas. It is a global company. We have offices in Chile, London, Singapore, Dubai, obviously a few offices in the US. We have a couple offices in Pune, in Hyderabad in India. And we also have an office in Afghanistan. Always. Yeah, I always say the same thing. We have developers everywhere, we have clients everywhere, and our AI journey has started, I was mentioning to Tom, about 5 years ago. We had acquired a product called Arvi out of Pune, India, which kind of explains the location there. And we were trying to solve a data aggregation problem. We were outsourcing a lot of that work. And with our company, we're a wealth-tech firm, so a lot of our products are really there to service wealth management firms, enterprise banks from an investment performance perspective. And a lot of the data comes structured and unstructured, so we wanted to solve for that problem. And we found Arvi. That was our data aggregation tool. So that's when we started really looking at AI. So really most recently after ChatGPT kind of just everything, we started looking at it from different aspects and perspectives. So really there's three main buckets that we're trying to evaluate how we can leverage AI. So one is the easiest one, right, is the operational side of things. How can our accounting team use it? How can our back office operations use AI to better serve their needs and make it more efficient? The second bucket is really in our development environment. So how can we leverage like tools like Claude AI and really make our developers a lot faster, more accurate, cleaner code, really save a lot of the administrative side of, if you ever met a developer, they love documenting their work. They just we're trying to find ways for them to like not have to do these things, but also remain accurate, follow the SDLC process. So we're really looking at those type of solutions that will help us become much more efficient, more accurate, and more safe. And then the third bucket that we're looking at it is really putting it into our products. So we already have partners. We're looking at ways to integrate within our reporting how AI can actually provide a story and generate a narrative behind your portfolio performance and why you made money or lost money and what happened with the market, and kind of give context that is automatically generated, that is specifically tailored for each account and for each portfolio. And it's been very, very well received. So these are the three use cases that we're looking at today. You mentioned MIT. We acquired a company called Vantage, and the founder, Greg Wolf, is a brilliant guy. He's kind of like the brain behind that product. And he actually started a firm that does AI consulting, and he's running a group called Sunday, SUNDAI. And it's MIT students. They meet every Sunday. And they just go crazy with projects. So we're going to be connecting with them, doing a couple of workshops with our teams, and just kind of share notes, what they're learning, what we're learning, and just kind of go through that journey.
Wow, interesting. So, Richard, your organization, I think, is a little more sophisticated than doing AI for a while, right? Enterprise Search, Agentic AI, I think you guys are probably deep in the weeds in that. Could you want to explain your company a little bit, your journey?
Sure. So we're a global investment bank, search for M&A transactions, really help pop up. The company's been around for probably 60 years. When I started, we were about $44 a share, coming off a legacy financial system. Over the past 7 or 8 years, we have continued to double in size, so the growth's been absolutely exponential. But being an investment bank, we are heavily regulated. Bankers can't work both sides of the transaction, so there's certain firewalls up so that people can't see specific deal data. It's a tough industry. And then being global, with GDPR and Germany, it gets even more challenging for what you can index, what you can save, and what you can surface up. Our AI journey, funny enough, we started 4 years ago. Oracle happens to be one of our platforms. They sent a team of engineers out to my ranch, and we worked in the media room on a couple of proof of concepts. Been in the financial system for well over 20 years, probably from different countries. The opportunity to create a frictionless engagement with our data was the business proposition that I saw leveraging AI. Typically, as an end user, business stakeholder, if you want data, you talk to IT, you build up a requirement document, a couple weeks later, maybe get a draft report, document it, test it, and you start getting some insight. Data warehouses, same thing, data visualization. Moving into an AI type layer, you can actually talk to your data. It's an exciting opportunity. But I'll tell you, 4 years ago, I remember standing up like this in the media room looking at a team of engineers. Everybody kind of had this look on their face as, well, we'll go along on the journey and we're going to get paid some money to do it, but we don't see it. So we took a very pragmatic approach. I was fortunate enough to have some R&D dollars in the budget to do some proof of concept. So met with our chief accounting officer and said, what is the biggest challenge, annual effort that you have to call me and say, what's our net uncollected revenue in our top 20 clients? All right, walk me through that use case. So I download this report. We're using Oracle. It takes a couple of hours because it's a massive report. Of course, everybody dumps it out to Excel. They throw some formulas behind it. Maybe 3.5, 4 hours later, he's got the answer. He can start to set up. Great. We're going to take that as a use case, and then we're going to look at all of our ServiceNow tickets, and we're going to bucket them into different themes and figure out what really should my team be doing versus what can we automate and add AI to. So that's where we started with our POC. You can now log into a Teams channel and ask Jarvis that uncollected revenue. As long as you've got security and permission to do it, you get the answer in about 45 seconds. Not only that, but it'll pop the reports. Like you see the top 20, like more detail behind that. And over that 4-year period, what Oracle's delivered has been deeper and deeper and deeper insights into all of that. Our ServiceNow ticket queue, half of the work that the team was doing was all automated and rolled up behind Jarvis. So that was our foray into how do we do AI. The change management, though, is just happening this year with people learning prompt engineering and different tools and trying to regulate. Well, we don't want that in a public LLM, but if you use this tool, it's fine because we have it on. So there are different teams throughout Houlihan that are tackling the problem. The benefit that I see is a lot of the users are partnering up with each other. Hey, here's a prompt that I designed. Put this in before you request this, that, or the other. As that education comes up, I think the capabilities and the advantage that we take of AI is going to be.
Are you guys keeping a prompt library kind of like a resource?
Yes.
I think they also work across LLM too, so you can keep that. Wow. Michael, so when you talk to folks, there's companies that are embracing AI, there's companies that are very reticent. What do you see are the biggest reasons why people are not deploying AI tools? And then what are some of the things you see that people are using or why they're accelerating the adoption of AI tools?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the reason why customers are not using AI or not adopting AI is just because they don't understand it and they're afraid of it. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Everybody jokes about ChatGPT hallucinations. Everybody jokes about, well, my grandma used to tell me how to write this phishing email and, try to jailbreak the LLM. So there's a lot of that has caused people to think that they can't control it. And I think that has led to a lot of pumping the brakes when it comes to deploying any sort of AI within the organization. Now, for customers that have embraced it and are running with it, I'm seeing all sorts of stuff. There's actually my boss is a huge user of this. You could almost call him a vibe coder. So he uses a Visual Studio plugin called AMP. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that specific plugin here. It is a very cool LLM for writing code. And so you can tell it whatever.py, add a new method that does X, Y, and Z. And it will actually write it for you, and it's pretty accurate. It's pretty good. So companies that aren't embracing it are scared of it, and I have a feeling that the companies that aren't embracing it, it's getting used whether they realize it or not. Again, it comes back to shadow IT, shadow AI. We may have within the last few years gotten control or a lid on shadow IT. For the most part, there's a lot of tools coming out there, but I think there is so much wild west with AI that people are just afraid of it, and they're saying, I don't understand it, so I'm just going to wait until something comes along that will help me understand it. And so they're starting to come into the market tools that will help control and govern and give people the insights that they need when they start deploying AI. But usually it's just because people are afraid of it.
And I get that. I talk to a lot of Texas CIO members who just had this conversation down in Houston summit where the CIO wanted to deploy these tools with the president of the company. He's like, well, hold on, there's risk, right? And so it's not you're at a competitive disadvantage if you don't embrace it. So that kind of leads into your world. What kind of competitive advantages are you seeing by using AI versus other organizations in your industry that aren't embracing it as quickly as you guys?
I would say there's really, I wouldn't even call it competitive advantage. I would say if you don't do it, you're going to be left behind. I mean, you're going to be the key of the world. Yeah, so I would say if you don't do it, you're just going to be left behind. It's almost a must. I think people are trying to reconcile with that today. And a lot of what we're doing, so that's from a competitive perspective, because I would argue all of our competitors are integrating it in different ways. And AI has to be part of your product roadmap, part of your tech stack, part of what you do. The clients are a different story. I do agree. There's a knowledge gap, and that kind of caused the hesitation. And what I was sharing with Richard a couple of days ago, the bigger the organization, the less they are really comfortable with taking risk, and they view AI as taking risk. The smaller the organization, you can try to kind of compete and stand out. They're more comfortable doing that because they feel like we got to do something to differentiate ourselves from the big boys. So that dynamic happens, and then to kind of dive in a couple different layers, what we see with the resistance or the lack of knowledge, it really depends on the stakeholders and the people that you're actually talking to. If you're talking to the folks that are leveraging the technology, that are in the operations, they're really scared that it's going to replace their jobs. And you got to really help them understand that this is really going to empower you to focus on the right things and work on more strategic things. And this is going to help you become more efficient and take care of all of the administrative things. And if you talk to some of the executives, they're like, we want it no matter what. And then you talk to compliance, they're like, well, we don't want any of it because we don't understand it. So really kind of, even within the same organization, we had an offsite with one of our clients. And we talked to 3 different stakeholders, and it was completely different feedbacks. And some really want it, some really don't care, some will say, no, we don't. Because, when you're talking to a compliance officer, I mean, unless they can really evaluate what the risk is, the answer is no until we better understand how that's going to impact the organization. Because their job is to really mitigate the risk. And if you don't understand the risk, the way you mitigate it is saying no. Right? So that's kind of the dynamics that we kind of see with our clients and some of the productization of AI within our tools.
So Richard, you were talking about going through some use cases, and I bet that builds confidence within an organization once you demonstrate a use case, especially with the accounting folks, being able to deliver that data that used to take hours, if not days, down to 4 to 5 seconds. Does that help propel into other use cases? I mean, did you start with the C-suite intentionally, or to get the buy-in? So what did that look like?
So I'm going to go off track a little bit about change management, right? To have any successful project, you have to address change management. And we as carbon-based life forms, we're hard-coded to like automation and patterns. So if any of you have like an hour-long commute and you've been doing it for a while, you kind of black out, right? You don't focus on it. That's because if you want to focus on things that are incredible, talking to loved ones, or phone calls, or listening to podcasts, or whatever. When you introduce change in an organization, people don't understand why they get upset, why they're angry. They're uncomfortable because you're making them think of something differently or do change. So there's always this resistance of, I see you, and you rolled out 150 projects last year. And I don't know why I'm angry at you, but I'm very angry. I want to throw a chair. Right? So, my strategy was great. I've got some R&D dollars. Let's show some ROI, show some real value proposition on it, but at the top down, that aids with the change management. So what our C-suite did, last year there was a lot of bulletins going out of, we need you guys to start playing around with AI. It's not scary. Let's demystify it. Here's a couple prompts. Here's some tools. They started that conversation, and it starts getting absorbed and change starts happening. So now, this year, as we're dealing with unstructured data and more sophisticated things with AI, they're starting to dig into it more and more. But the change management underpinning still has to happen. Otherwise, it's just going to be like you mentioned, it's going to take my job away. Or I don't understand it. I don't want to dig into it. I'm at a conference in 2 weeks in Vegas for Oracle. Half the accounting team in LA is going. We showed them some demos of this Oracle AI Agent Studio, and they're already, I don't know if we want to do these projects, we can reduce headcount. Like, we undersold it and said the expectation is really low. This is new, it's only been out for a couple of months, let's start getting our feet wet. They are hard charging now into it because they've been primed. We want to go learn everything, hands-on labs, and how can we automate, something like an accounting function, which is pretty transactional. You just want to focus on what the exceptions are, right?
Now we're all human. Change is something we all hate. So trying to get people to embrace it, whether it's positive or negative, it's very hard. So, Michael, you discussed a little bit about the genie being out of the bottle, and most companies sitting there being fearful of security implications. Therefore, they don't want to deploy new AI tools. But I think that much like just the term AI comes out, what are some real-world security threats? I mean, people were like, I think my data can be exposed. How? Right? So Copilot just had their Echo leak hack, right, in June, which is rather unique, because I don't know if anybody's here heard of it, but can you describe that leak and how it's on a zero touch?
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite ones that has been coming out recently. So if you have the Copilot plugin for Outlook and you ask it to summarize an email for you, it's going to read all of the contents of the email. Well, the problem is that it will take prompt commands that are embedded in the email. So it would potentially leak sensitive data that even if you're not using the public version of Copilot, if you're using your private Copilot, this will still have access to that data and it will leak it for you. So that's an absolute horrible one. Another one that I saw was there's an AI browser plugin that would take commands from web pages that you visited. So you visit a malicious Reddit post just by virtue of browsing to that particular post and watching it, it would exploit a vulnerability in that browser plugin to leak all of your data, leak everything that it can get access to. So that's another huge one. And then we all know about, I think most people know about the Samsung software developer that was trying to debug some code. It turned out to be some proprietary code. He uploaded it to ChatGPT and said, hey, it crashes on line 73. Tell me why. Well, guess what? Everything you put into a public LLM becomes part of the LLM. It retrains itself. So he basically leaked proprietary source code from Samsung into an LLM. So, and that's part of the problem, that people read about this and they hear about these things and they're like, oh, well, we're just not going to use AI. But like you guys said, it's coming. It's already here. People are using it. Your competitors are using it. If you're not using it, you're at a disadvantage. So you need to have ways to control what leaks, what doesn't leak, even what data you can put into it or what data it can spit out. So again, we're starting to see some tools emerge in the market that can help with that. But there are, so many novel and new attacks that are coming out for LLMs, and whether it be ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, that it is kind of scary out there, and we need to take that into consideration when deploying AI within an organization. And that's kind of one of the questions I have for everybody here. Who in this room is responsible for dictating or creating the AI policy within your organization? Almost no one should have their hands raised, unless you're on the business side. So really, this is a risk-based business decision. This is going to be your chief compliance officer. Now, if you think about a racing chart, IT is going to be consulted, IT is going to be responsible for implementing the policy that's defined, but we as IT professionals should not be the one dictating AI policy to the organization. That has to be a business decision from the business side of the house, and then they hand that over to the technology side, and it gets implemented and governed and watched and monitored and all of that. So I think that's another one of the reasons people aren't implementing AI is because they don't know who should be making these decisions. Because you go to the board and they're like, I don't know what AI is. I can spell it on a good day, but they don't know much about it. So we need to get education out there and educate organizations to this is the playbook you should follow. Sounds like a great thing for Texas to have a webinar on maybe at some point. So at least that's my 2 cents.
Not for example, so when you're dealing with proprietary information from your clients, you mentioned that they're fearful that information being out there because it's from not just company data, but it's their own personal finance data. How do you take them through that and make them more comfortable when you're using AI around their data sets?
Yeah, it's super easy. Well, we have clients that will just flat out say, no, that's impossible. And that's okay. I mean, we try to do the education piece. But again, it's typically larger organizations that are not willing to take the risk. The other clients that are kind of open to the idea, we really try to talk them through the security, the architecture, and then any false names. We don't use their data in the development, by the way. So the development side, we try to be very, very careful and very particular about not using any client data as we're going through the development process.
To train or?
Yeah, to train, we just use sanitized data. Once we deploy it and we feel comfortable that it's in the product, then we have to get their permission to make sure that they're comfortable, and we walk through the architecture, the security, and then they have to make that business decision if they're willing to, I don't want to call it take the risk, but if they're comfortable with what they presented in a way that makes sense to them and they feel that it's good enough for their clients. I love the change management topic. I don't think people really realize that is a difference maker as much as the actual technology. Because at the end of the day, for people, we got to decide whether we do this or we don't. And the way you help them and walk them through the decision is the change management piece. I saw an interview, and I wish I remember the gentleman's name. But it was an executive that worked at Apple, and they were essentially the mastermind behind how to educate people through the first iPhone and how to use it. Because that was a tremendous shift in the industry, right? I mean, you have applications and internet, and you can use your own personal information on there and access all kinds of stuff. And he was actually recruited by Tesla, because Tesla had a similar issue. They completely changed the car industry. And it wasn't about, his focus wasn't about, here's an electric car, here's why it's awesome, that's why it's so fast. But it was about, well, here's the range, here's what that means, here's how you can charge it. That's, there's the range anxiety is real. And they really put a campaign behind educating people about how to use that product rather than all of the bells and whistles of the product that came later. So the first step is to lower the anxiety. You're not going to be stuck on the side of the road because you're not in charge. We actually have superchargers, and here's what that means, and here's how easy it is to install it at your home, so people can actually buy it. And then, kind of like the nice bells and whistles and features come after that. I think we're at this stage right now because AI is such a huge shift to everything that we do today. It's kind of it's very overwhelming for folks. And for the argument, I like to use a silly example where, well, I'm going to just lose my job. And it's kind of like, well, when like Excel came out, it's not like we didn't have accountants anymore. You know what I mean? That was like the fear that, well, you have this tool that people can do it. No, it's going to be used by you to do even more better things, right? So I think we're in this critical stage. I would argue in the U.S. we're doing really big strides, but globally, which I was speaking to a lot folks with a global footprint. I'm kind of impressed with, if you look at the Middle East, Dubai, they have a minister of AI. There's a lot of governance and ideas in the Europe. So we need more of that, because if you have a minister of AI in a country, you already feel like, okay, this is being taken care of, this is real, yeah, it makes it more tangible, it's not a gimmick, it's not going away, it's not a fact, right? So the change management piece, I totally agree with you. You can't talk about it enough.
Interesting. So, Rich, you mentioned Oracle, and that's the platform that your company uses. Now, are they building in all these security tools within their platform, and that's what you guys are utilizing, or are we going to third-party platforms and plugging it into that Oracle piece? And you mentioned, not restricting data sets or looking at prompts, right? Who's asking for what, and being able to sanitize that as it goes through the process.
So everything we're doing in the Oracle stack never leaves our Oracle tenant. That allows us to move a lot quicker because it's protected data. We also have the benefit of accurate data. So anything you do with AI, bad data, you're going to get bad results. But a financial system, it's pixel perfect data. If somebody creates a journal, somebody else has to review it and post it. Anything AI on top of that, where you're arranging the data, reporting out on it, doing queries, or even forecasting using the generate function, we're not seeing any hallucinations, and it's hyper secure. That allows us to do a lot more things in that environment. On the banker side, though, when we talk about unstructured data and field data, there's data rooms and security and layers, and we're trying to figure that piece out. I think there's like 190 people in a pilot, kind of working through all the different use cases of what works, what doesn't work, how do we securitize it, how do we deal with hallucinations, what are the right tools to use, because these bankers love very complex formulas, so not a lot of tools are going to build spreadsheets. Other tools are better for PDF. So there's varying degrees, but within our enterprise stack, we've got Workday, Salesforce, SAP Concur, and Oracle. Anything within that Oracle stack, we bring that data in from those other systems. We can report on it in there, but it's all securitized, and it adheres to our security principles.
Okay, so we're at the 30-40 minute mark. I'd like to do this open to questions from the group, and so don't be shy. So I'll pick on somebody. The biggest guy in the room, of course. So I know that you guys are doing some things on the AI front. You're in the healthcare industry. What are your biggest concerns when it comes to security, HIPAA, the tools that you're using?
So, health, privacy, information being secure and heavily regulated. I think a lot of the hesitation right now is because there's so much investment being done on AI right now that they're taking a lot of the safeguards off, at least from a public perspective. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, do you think that there'd be less hesitation from business leaders if we had more substantial privacy and protection and security built in from a legislative or regulatory aspect? Would that help at all, instead of having basically all controls off and just cut loose and try to develop as fast as we possibly can?
So I think regulation is going to stifle innovation, and where we're at personally in this journey, I really don't do that. Give us room to explore. We know what the risks are for our business, but trying to adapt to somebody else's guideline, there may be some issues that delay or retard.
But wouldn't that be a perfect spot for a public-private partnership between the leaders like Oracle and Microsoft and OpenAI to get together and form a framework?
So now you're getting into my personal beliefs.
That's fine, man.
Anytime you want something done, you're going to pick a small tech team and you're going to go do that. And if you try to create a big organizational board and involve government, it's just going to slow things down, right? Bureaucracy is counter to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I would also say that think about web browsers. There is a standard, an RFC for HTTP, right? There are multiple web browsers out there. Everyone has their own implementation of the standard. And so I think you would see a lot of fracturing if you went down that route, is that everybody would create some really generic framework that didn't have a whole lot of use, and then Microsoft would embrace and extend, as they've been known to do in the past, and they'll have their specific things that don't really follow the framework that everybody else agreed on. So I think that bureaucracy and capitalism would, like Richard said, it would really stifle the AI growth, at least if it was implemented at this point.
Well, I see it a little bit different. Well, I do agree that politics sometimes kind of get in the way. I think it depends on the region, really, and the way you go about it. So I mentioned the Minister of AI, like the UAE. I mean, those guys that's fun, getting all the innovation, getting a lot of funding, getting all the, great minds in there because they want to leverage it and they want to be a leader in that region. So as a government official, they're actually doing the opposite. They're trying to remove roadblocks and make the consumers feel comfortable about the technology, but also bring in a lot of business and the best of both worlds, right? So I think that's more difficult when you talk about the U.S. politics because you have two-party system. There's always going to be that friction, and sometimes it's a lose-lose situation, and it's just the argument really deteriorate the whole point of the argument, right? But when you look at a kingdom, there's a lot of cons, but the pro is they're really just one voice. They're really trying to help the people, the government, the industry, with a country that's as advanced as the UAE or the GCC in general. So I think in those examples, it actually does help make people feel more safe, comfortable, and actually recruit a lot of business.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach it. My concern was bringing in the vendors to do it. Even though I work for a vendor, and I would say don't bring in the vendors. Don't let the vendors be the ones that drive this because they're going to have their own agendas. They're going to drive what they think it needs to be. And so I think that if you have some sort of governing body or some department, ministry, whatever you want to call it, I think that would be a far better approach for creating some sort of framework rather than letting the vendors have at it and everybody fights with each other and then they all try to figure out how to make the most money off of it. And I don't think that's what this industry needs right now.
Other questions, Brian?
So I hear a lot about compliance. So I totally agree. When you're a small business, we're a $50 million business. There's 5 of us on the board, and we don't have a compliance officer. And our CEO, he's the opposite. He doesn't want to put the toothpaste back in the tube. He understands the risk, and he's like, business, go at it. So we've published 32 tools that we are okay if you use it. Go ahead. If you need to buy a license, it's in your budget. We're here to consult you. But he understands we're a small business. Our risks are not, even if proprietary stuff gets out, and most of our proprietary stuff is already public. We tell it to our customers. So what would you say? Like, okay, you don't have a compliance, or you don't told your CEO has said go at it. Would you have any recommendations for that type of situation?
So, it's a sliding scale of risk, right? What are you willing to accept from a risk profile? It's no different than a company coming in and saying, we're doing business in this country and it's small, revenue small. Well, you're not going to pass audit because you haven't done blah, blah, blah. What's the penalty? Well, it's a $7,000 fine, or you got to spend $100,000 to put this program in place. To spend $7,000 every year, right?
Right.
That's an easy decision. Why? Because you're bringing the money home to the provider.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I would use that enthusiasm from up top as a catalyst to start creating a framework and start creating a policy.
So to get over this fear is that we actually had everybody. We had 100 people. We brought everybody together, and we tasked everybody to ask their favorite AI, what does your job look like in the future? What does your department look like in the future? Then ask some more questions, come prepared and talk about it. And it really got them over the fear because they started to realize, because AI was telling them, well, no, it's not going to get rid of you. It's just going to change your work.
It's going to augment you. Right?
Yeah. So it was a good way. It was actually a really, really good way. Everybody came out of that meeting and were like, and they really went at it. They had to put together, whatever AI told them. How's your job going to change? How's your team going to change? And then they had to get up and talk about it, and then we could drill them about it.
Nice.
So what platform did you build those tools on? Sorry.
We don't really have tools. We're open. We have 37 tools that people can use.
Okay.
And we have license agreements. But the business can decide.
Okay.
The business can decide how they use it, what they use. Completely open box.
Do you have a training program in place to this is what you should do, this is what you should not do?
We don't. We get together once a month for kind of like a lunch and learn type stuff, and we let people ask questions, and we try to answer it the best we can. But the truth is, at this point, a lot of people in our business are way more knowledgeable and better at it, and doing like all the kind of LLMs and building their own stuff than we are. So we're sometimes open up to the floor because we're like, hey, somebody here probably has done more than we have in the IT department, and usually they have.
Unbridled innovation.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from this conversation is that we've incentivized everybody to step on the gas and take these risks, right? What I'm not hearing is that there's no incentive for us to do this with caution. Qantas is the only company I've heard of that pays their C-suite bonuses based on did we get breached, did we leak data, did we do the right thing cybersecurity-wise. Only company I've seen. There's no federal regulations that punish healthcare for losing your information, insurance companies for losing your information, telecoms for losing your information.
It's about lawsuits.
Exactly. All my stuff is on the dark web, and I get a settlement check for $6 after 3 years, right? That's basically what it comes down to. So, do you see any of that coming without some type of federal oversight that's going to impose these penalties for being irresponsible? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Not put a control on it, but punish the bad behavior.
Yeah, it's good. Not the correct.
So I'll tell you, I think it's going to be self-regulating as people get dinged. There's a lawsuit right now against Workday. So there was an individual that brought a class action lawsuit against Workday because part of their recruiting AI algorithm, he said, was biased. You're not hiring white males over 40 or whatever the details were. The interesting thing about this is they're not only going after Workday, but they're going after every company that uses Workday that's using that same technology, right? We're not part of that class because we've been very prudent about what we want to use and what we don't want to use. But as those things come to fruition and that case gets settled, I think it's going to inform everybody else back to the risk conversation of this is too high of a risk for us to tackle this at this point until somebody else goes through the innovation cycle to figure it out.
Yeah, and I would say it exists for a reason. SOX exists for a reason. All of these compliance frameworks exist for a reason, and it's because somebody has screwed up really bad in the past, and that's what's driven the creation of these. So I think you will see some of that with AI as well in the future, that somebody's going to do something really, really bad and really, really stupid. It's going to be a huge breach, and that will lead to a push for legislation. I would mention $6 that you gotta check for. So I got an email recently. Apparently, I used some mobile parking app to pay for it. They got a breach. I got a coupon code for 25 cents, and it can be used up to 4 times. So my data was worth $1.
Questions, John?
Chris. Yeah, no worries. So we're using Anthropic and agentic development, and it's been a game changer for our team. Their ability to move and offset a lot of the lower level developments by pushing it there, and it's been great. So lots of success, lots of fun. But on the other side of that, so y'all heard of OpenAI had their version that they brought up, and it, when being brought down, tried to offload itself by hacking through a firewall, moving itself out to another set of servers so it would not go down. They said, this is one that they developed, and it was written to have more just flexibility in its own decision making, and it chose to protect itself. One developer can throw an entire flight simulator in the back of Microsoft's operating system, and nobody knew it existed for years. What are the concerns when we're generally adopting this technology into our environments, not knowing that there could be one or two people in different places that have that malicious intent, and you may not see it until it's past that fact or too late. And then taking it up a level, you've got the same thing of organizations that are adopting these, but at the top you have a handful of people that have access. Now the access is supposed to be firewall off. They can't get to your data if you don't allow them to train on it. If I'm paying for an enterprise class license, you can't get to what I'm doing. If I bring up my own LLM but I'm using your technology, you're not supposed to get to it. What's the concern when you get to one or two or three people in the world that have access to 100% of everything that we're feeding in to those models?
Yeah, so let's talk about risk, right? The only absolute risk mitigation is like Kaiser Soze from Usual Suspects, right? The big boogeyman. I never want to put my hand in that cookie jar because everybody's going to die. That's not reality, right? There's always going to be breaches. Cybersecurity every year has compounded their spend year on year on year because of new threats. We're going through that now with wire fraud. We're doing that with check fraud. We're doing that with, again, back to Workday. They had socially engineered some engineers at Workday to give up the keys to the What the hell's going on? They keep moving the goalposts. So what can we do about it? Just get smarter and every year build a better mousetrap. But that risk is always going to happen.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I mean, I agree. That's going to happen at some point. I think it's very interesting about the 3-4 people control everything, but we're seeing it in other industries too, right? Like if you think about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon, and now Larry Ellison. I mean, they're going to essentially control all of the social media, all of the communication for essentially most of the world, right? So that would also be a concern because you have like 3-4 people that can control what messaging gets out there, control the narrative. I know it sounds like kind of hopeless, but there's really not what can you do? There's really nothing to do about that portion of it. So having few people with so much influence, I think it's just the world that we live in today. And we're users of those innovations.
Yeah, and I would say another big part of it is to have a policy, and not only have a policy, but follow it. That's usually everybody's like, oh great, I made this really cool policy, and then it gets put in a binder and it starts collecting dust, and nobody actually follows it. Kind of like those onboarding, documents that are still so very dusty. I think that there are tools starting to emerge that will provide you some protection. I think some of the older tools out there will also provide some bit of protection. I mean, even just a content filter, block risky or newly registered domains, and that's at least going to help some breach be prevented from happening. So there's always another tactic, there's always another breach, there's always another something else. And just like everything else, we've got to do the best we can. We used to worry about Stuxnet, and now that's not a big deal anymore. And now we've moved on to something else to worry about. And eventually, I think the AI security problem will be solved well enough that we won't have to worry about it as much, and then we can worry about the next thing that comes along.
So I think he's on the right track I say lean into it. Let the problem also be the solution. It in itself is adding new tools to secure yourself. Rather than thinking about how I can hinder myself to protect myself, how can I use the exact same thing that I'm worried about to actually protect myself?
Well, I was going to say use AI to defeat
Yeah,
AI.
right.
Yeah, you have virus and antivirus. But I do think it's a lot more riskier if you don't use it
Yeah.
from a business perspective.
Right. But it itself is going to be the solution for the problem.
So we're reaching our point here. I always like to close with like a signature question. It's about fostering relationships and building chemistry between folks so you can have that trust and you can share. So on the wheel, what do you do for fun, man?
So I enjoy riding motorcycles. I enjoy hunting paper. So I don't hunt deer. I don't hunt anything else. I go to the shooting range and I hunt paper.
Oh, okay.
As Coco was saying. I also have 4 kids, so they keep me busy. We also have 5 dogs because my wife is a pet collector. 3 of those were foster fails, so we fostered dogs and we failed to return them. We just decided to leave them. So yeah, that's a lot of my downtime.
I think you're a good company if you're with some people.
Yeah.
A lot of you.
Well, I have a toddler, so I don't know.
What's time?
So that's definitely my hobby right now. But I would say one hobby of mine that I haven't been able to do as much is I like to take the car on the racetrack. That's a lot of fun, but expensive too. It's a lot of fun.
There's a place out in Fort Worth called Exotic Motors. It's
Yeah.
a private racetrack. Have you been there? That's fun.
Yeah, they opened one in right next to where I live, so that's kind of dangerous. But I haven't had the chance to do it. I do like hunting paper. I've been using it. That's really cool. A lot. I mean, that paper just gets it. So yeah, Richard and I are going to do shooting at some point. So you want awesome. If you want to join from Houston.
Long range. It's long range.
And traveling, I love traveling, different food, different cultures. I'm very fortunate with my position. I get to do that a lot, quite often. So yeah.
Awesome. Richard?
6 dogs.
Okay.
Had 7, down to 6. She was old, but 8 horses. My daughter's a competitive barrel racer. So my wife and my daughter are off to Oklahoma this weekend for Big Buckle, and we'll be at Junior Farm in December. So all the free time either goes to the range or dealing with these crazy horses.
Well, again, I want to thank you guys for participating. So let's give it up for that. Again, I want to thank our sponsor, Unity and Kato. So, like I said, we'll be having an online event here in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, depending on Michael's schedule. A lot of the security concerns that we were talking about today can be found in their new acquisition of AIM Security. Very cool product. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody coming out and participating in the Texas CIO. We'll be doing some other events. So yeah, thank you for coming on out. Great to meet all of you, and thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.